Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1936. The Great Depression had left its mark on every corner of America, but perhaps nowhere was its grip more tenacious than in the remote hollows of the Ozark Mountains. Stone County, Arkansas, a place where the hills fold in on themselves like an intricate puzzle, creating valleys so deep that sunlight touches the bottom for only a few hours each day. It was here, along the Buffalo River, that the Harlow family maintained their peculiar isolation for 3 generations. The first documentation of the Harlows' existence comes from county tax records dating back to 1887. Ezekiel Harlow purchased 76 acres of rugged mountain land for a surprisingly substantial sum, paying in gold coins of Spanish origin. The clerk's notation, preserved in the Stone County Historical Society archives, simply reads, "Paid in full. Man of few words. Eyes unlike any I've seen." This cryptic description would become a common thread in accounts of interactions with the Harlow family throughout the decades to follow. According to land registry documents, Ezekiel arrived in the area claiming to be from Pennsylvania, though no record of his existence prior to his appearance in the Ozarks has ever been verified. He brought with him a young wife, Constance, described in church records as quiet of manner and pale of complexion, with unusual amber eyes. The couple initially made efforts to integrate into the small community, attending the local Methodist church sporadically and participating in harvest festivals during their first 2 years in the region. By all accounts, the Harlows kept to themselves. Their homestead was positioned at the end of a narrow, winding dirt path that became impassable during the frequent rains. The closest neighbor, a farmer named Jeremiah Dawson, lived 4 miles downstream. According to a local newspaper clipping from 1912, Dawson described the Harlows as decent folk who prefer their privacy. This would be the last positive description of the family recorded. During the early years, Ezekiel earned a modest reputation as a healer. Knowledgeable about the medicinal properties of local plants, entries in the journal of Dr. Samuel Wilson, the only physician serving the county at that time, mention Ezekiel as a resource for cases beyond conventional treatment. Wilson's notes from 1893 described consulting Ezekiel about a strange, wasting illness affecting 3 families along the eastern ridge. Harlow provided a tincture of unusual efficacy, Wilson wrote. When questioned about its composition, he merely smiled and said, "It comes from deeper places than you know." The Harlow property itself was the subject of curiosity and eventually unease among locals. Unlike other homesteads in the area, which typically consisted of a main house, barn, and perhaps a separate kitchen or workshop, Ezekiel's construction projects never seemed to cease. Year after year he added to the original structure wings, towers, and underground chambers that seemed excessive for a family of 3. Constance had given birth to a son, Ambrose, in 1889. A surveyor's report from 1901, commissioned as part of a county-wide tax reassessment, notes, "Harlow dwelling defies conventional architectural principles. Additions appear haphazard from exterior, but follow some internal logic not apparent to observer. Structure extends underground to unknown depth. Owner refused access to certain areas, claiming fragile experiments in progress." What drew attention to the Harlow property in the autumn of 1936 was not any action taken by the family, but rather the peculiar behavior of the surrounding wildlife. Hunters reported that deer, usually abundant in the area, refused to cross certain boundaries near the Harlow property. Birds fell silent within a half-mile radius of the homestead. Even predators, bears, and mountain lions were documented to take circuitous routes to avoid the area. County Wildlife Officer Vernon Moss noted in his official report, "Local fauna exhibiting unprecedented aversion to northeast quadrant of Stone County wilderness area. Possible environmental contamination suspected. This report, filed on October 12, 1936, would be the first in a series of increasingly disturbing documents related to the case. Moss, a meticulous observer with 20 years of experience in the region, included additional details that were later redacted from official records but preserved in his personal journal, now held by his granddaughter, Rebecca Moss Turner. "The behavior extends beyond simple avoidance," he wrote. "Specimens captured near the boundary and relocated elsewhere exhibit profound disorientation. A tagged deer, released 10 miles south, returned to precisely the same boundary point within 36 hours, where it paced back and forth until dying of apparent exhaustion. Autopsy revealed no physical abnormalities, but the animal's eyes had changed from brown to amber. The initial investigation was perfunctory. The Depression had depleted resources, and rural Arkansas was not a priority for federal assistance. Local authorities, consisting primarily of Sheriff Abner Cooper and his 2 deputies, made the journey to the Harlow property on October 17th. What they found, or more accurately, what they didn't find, sparked a mystery that would consume the region for decades. The Harlow homestead appeared abandoned. The main house, a 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, showed signs of recent habitation. A pot of stew still hung over cold ashes in the hearth. 3 beds were made with military precision. A family Bible lay open on the kitchen table, with certain passages underlined in what laboratory tests would later confirm was not ink, but a substance containing human plasma. Sheriff Cooper's official report, filed on October 19, 1936, states, "No signs of struggle or foul play. Family appears to have departed in haste. Most personal belongings remain. Livestock well tended but locked in barn with no access to food or water. Most troubling is the absence of any tracks leading away from the property, despite the soft, muddy conditions of the surrounding area." What the official report omits, but was later revealed in Cooper's personal correspondence with state authorities, was the unsettling configuration of the house interior. "Rooms don't connect as they should," he wrote to Arkansas State Police Captain James Thornton on October 21st. "Measurements taken inside and outside don't match. Windows visible from exterior cannot be located within. Most disturbing was the cellar, which contains a corridor leading to a stone door inscribed with symbols similar to those found at the Hawksbill Crag site, but not recognized by the archaeological experts I've consulted. The Harlow family consisted of 3 members at this time: Ambrose Harlow, 67, his son Thaddeus, 42, and Thaddeus's wife Coraline, 39. Local records indicate that the couple had been married for 17 years, but remained childless. Deputy Franklin Reed, who explored the basement, refused to enter certain areas, reporting that the air inside felt wrong, dense and metallic, like standing too close to a lightning strike. Reed, a veteran of the Great War who had witnessed the horrors of trench warfare, requested reassignment after this discovery and ultimately resigned from the sheriff's department 3 months later. In his letter of resignation, he wrote only, "There are some things man was not meant to disturb." The investigation stalled for lack of evidence. No bodies were found, no crime could be definitively established. The Harlow family had simply vanished, leaving behind a property that locals increasingly avoided. Sheriff Cooper, in his final report dated December 3, 1936, wrote, "Case suspended pending new evidence. Property to remain under intermittent surveillance." This surveillance proved difficult to maintain. Deputies assigned to check the property on a monthly basis consistently reported equipment failures, watches stopping, compass needles spinning, batteries draining inexplicably. More troublingly, they experienced disorientation and memory gaps, often finding themselves unable to recall portions of their visits or discovering that more time had passed than they could account for. After Deputy Lewis Morgan reported losing 6 hours during what should have been a routine 30-minute inspection in February 1937, Sheriff Cooper discontinued the surveillance program. This might have been the end of the story, a peculiar footnote in local history, had it not been for what happened in the spring of 1943. America was at war, resources were directed overseas, and the remote areas of the Ozarks received even less attention than usual. It was in this context that Randall Prentice, a botanical researcher from the University of Arkansas, ventured into the area seeking specimens of rare medicinal plants known to grow in the region. Prentice kept meticulous field journals, which now reside in the university's special collections. His entry for April 17, 1943, describes his discovery of an unusual clearing approximately 3 miles northeast of the abandoned Harlow property. Perfectly circular clearing, roughly 100 feet in diameter. Vegetation appears to have been removed with precision. Soil is unusually dark and fertile compared to surrounding area. At center stands a single oak tree of substantial age with unusual markings carved into its bark. The symbols appear to be neither Cherokee nor any known settler language. Most striking is the absolute silence within the clearing. No insects, no birds, no rustling of leaves despite the steady breeze. Prentice collected soil samples and took several photographs of the carved symbols. He made plans to return the following day with additional equipment. His journal entry for April 18th consists of a single line: "They are still here." The handwriting in this entry is noticeably different from his usual neat script, more hurried, with heavier pressure applied to the page. Prentice himself was never seen again. The soil samples Prentice collected were analyzed by university laboratories in June 1943, after his disappearance. The results, marked anomalous and filed without further action, indicated unusual chemical properties, elevated levels of iron and phosphorus, trace amounts of elements not typically found in the region, and an unidentified organic compound that resisted conventional analysis. Most curiously, the samples continued to maintain a temperature approximately 2 degrees higher than their surroundings, regardless of ambient conditions, a property they still exhibit today in the university's geological collection. A search party found Prentice's abandoned camp 5 days after his disappearance. His equipment was neatly packed. His specimen bags were labeled and organized. The only items missing were his journal, which was later found in a hollow tree half a mile from the camp, and his camera. The search party reported an overwhelming sense of dread that prevented them from venturing farther northeast, toward the clearing he had described. Harold Jenkins, who led the search effort, later wrote in a letter to Prentice's widow, "There came a point beyond which none of us could proceed. It wasn't a physical barrier, nothing we could see or touch. It was a feeling, like walking into a wall of fear. Our bodies simply refused to move forward. Even the dogs wouldn't go past that invisible line. They lay down and whimpered, and nothing would persuade them to continue." The investigation into Prentice's disappearance was cursory at best. The war effort took precedence, and a single missing academic was not a priority. His case was officially classified as probable accident in wilderness area, despite the lack of a body or any evidence of animal attack or environmental hazard. For the next decade, the area remained largely undisturbed. Locals called it Harlow Hollow and warned others to stay away. Hunting parties avoided it. The few farming families who had settled within a 5-mile radius gradually relocated, citing poor crop yields, livestock illness, and bad dreams. By 1954, a 2-square-mile area centered on the former Harlow property was completely uninhabited. One of these relocated farmers, Joseph Carter, provided a deposition to the county clerk in 1949 explaining his decision to abandon land that had been in his family for 3 generations. It started with the well water. Seemed fine at first, but after about a month it took on a metallic taste. Then the livestock started behaving strangely, standing in perfect circles in the field, all facing inward, not moving for hours. My wife began having the dreams, always the same, figures standing around our bed, watching. Their proportions were wrong. After our dog attacked my wife, a gentle animal that had never shown aggression, We knew we had to leave. That year, the newly formed U.S. Forest Service began a survey of the Ozark region as part of a national initiative to catalog natural resources. 2 survey teams were assigned to Stone County. The first completed its work without incident. The second, assigned to the northeastern quadrant, including Harlow Hollow, filed a single preliminary report and then failed to check in for 3 consecutive days. Forest Service records, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 1967, revealed that the team's radio communications ended with a cryptic message: structures where no structures should be, evidence of habitation despite official vacancy, request immediate. The transmission ended mid-sentence. A rescue team found the survey team's vehicle abandoned on a logging road 2 miles from the Harlow property. Their equipment was missing. Their tent had been set up but showed no signs of having been slept in. Most disturbing were the plaster casts they had made of footprints found near the original homestead, footprints that showed sets of bare human feet, all adult-sized, walking in perfect synchronization, with exactly the same stride length and depth of impression. Analysis of these casts, conducted by forensic anthropologist Dr. Eleanor Wright in 1955, yielded disturbing conclusions that were subsequently classified by federal authorities. Wright's preliminary notes, preserved in her private papers and discovered after her death in 1982, state the footprints, while superficially human, display subtle anatomical impossibilities. The distribution of weight across the foot does not match human gait patterns. The toe configuration suggests greater articulation than the human foot possesses. Most significantly, microscopic analysis of residue in the prints contains traces of an unknown protein structure that does not match any terrestrial species in our reference collection. The official Forest Service report concluded that the survey team, consisting of Robert Chen, Michael Oakes, and Teresa Sullivan, had deserted their posts, possibly due to hallucinatory episodes triggered by environmental factors, potentially including contaminated water sources or fungal spores known to exist in the region. This explanation was accepted by supervisors eager to avoid scandal, but those familiar with the 3 missing workers described them as consummate professionals with no history of erratic behavior. Chen's sister, May Chen Parker, fought a lengthy legal battle to have the case reopened, insisting that her brother would never have abandoned his duties. Her efforts led to a brief reinvestigation in 1957, during which a search dog followed a scent trail from the abandoned tent to the edge of a limestone bluff overlooking the Buffalo River. The dog refused to proceed further, exhibiting signs of extreme distress. No evidence of falls or bodies was discovered in the river below, despite an extensive search. The area was subsequently designated as a watershed protection zone and marked off limits to further surveys. No explanation was provided for this designation, as the area contains no significant water sources that feed into municipal supplies. The classification appears to have been a convenient administrative tool to prevent further official visits to the site. Local interest in the Harlow case might have faded entirely had it not been for the efforts of Claudia Morrison, editor of the Mountain View Observer, from 1955 to 1963. Morrison became fascinated by the story after discovering a box of old sheriff's reports while researching an article on the history of law enforcement in Stone County. Over the course of 3 years, Morrison published a series of increasingly detailed articles about the Harlow family and the strange occurrences surrounding their property. She tracked down distant relatives, interviewed elderly residents who remembered encounters with the family, and pieced together a history far more disturbing than the official records suggested. According to Morrison's research, the Harlows had not always been reclusive. Ezekiel Harlow had been a prominent figure in the community during the 1890s, known for his generosity during times of hardship and his exceptional knowledge of local plant life. He served briefly as a county commissioner and was considered a respected, if somewhat eccentric, member of society. Morrison discovered records indicating that Ezekiel had established a small astronomical observatory on his property, unusual for a rural landowner of that era. His correspondence with several academic institutions, primarily regarding observations of anomalous celestial phenomena, suggests a man of some scientific education. A letter from a professor at Miskatonic University, dated 1895, responds to Ezekiel's description of transient nocturnal lights in the northeastern sky by suggesting they might be associated with the Lyrid meteor shower, though noting that the color Ezekiel described, an amber hue unlike any natural illumination, was inconsistent with typical meteor activity. The change came in 1897, when Ezekiel's wife Constance died under circumstances that were never fully explained. The official death certificate, signed by Dr. William Barton, listed the cause as cardiac failure following acute distress. Local gossip recorded in Morrison's interviews suggested something more troubling. Sarah Mitchell, who was 97 when Morrison interviewed her in 1957, had been a young woman at the time of Constance's death. Her account, published in The Observer on August 12, 1957, states, "That poor woman changed in her final months. Last time I saw her, about a week before she passed, she grabbed my hand after service and whispered, 'They're listening,' through my skin." Ezekiel took her home right quick after that. What Mitchell didn't include in her public account, but confided to Morrison privately, as recorded in the journalist's notebooks now held by the Arkansas State Archives, was that Constance's eyes had changed color in her final months, from blue to a strange amber hue that seemed to glow in dim light. Mitchell also reported that the woman's voice had altered, developing a resonant quality, like several people speaking in perfect unison. Doctor got real thin, but her belly swelled up like she was carrying a child, which was impossible at her age. Eyes sunk into her head, would only come to church with a heavy veil covering her face. Barton's medical records, which Morrison gained access to through his grandson, include additional details about Constance's condition. His notes from a house call 3 weeks before her death describe patient exhibiting symptoms consistent with late-term pregnancy despite advanced age and previous history of infertility. Abdominal distension firm but not consistent with normal fetal development. No movement detected, no heartbeat audible. Patient reports sensation of crawling beneath the skin and auditory hallucinations. Husband refused hospitalization, declined further examination. Following his wife's death, Ezekiel withdrew from community life. He pulled his son Ambrose out of school and began constructing additions to their home. Unusual features like windows placed near the floor, doorways too narrow for comfortable passage, and a series of small chambers that interconnected in confusing patterns. A stonemason hired to assist with some of this work reported that Ezekiel insisted certain rooms be built without windows or with light sources arranged to eliminate shadows. Perhaps most telling was the construction of what Ezekiel referred to as the transition room, a perfectly circular chamber at the center of the house, with mirrored surfaces covering walls, ceiling, and floor. According to the stonemason's account, preserved in a letter to his brother dated 1899, Ezekiel insisted that reflections must be endless in all directions and spent considerable sums importing specialized mirrors from Europe. The chamber was completed in 1901, after which no outsiders were permitted to enter it. By 1910, when Ezekiel died, officially of natural causes, though no doctor examined the body, the Harlow property had acquired its reputation as a place to be avoided. Ambrose, who inherited the property, maintained even less contact with the outside world than his father had. He made twice-yearly trips to Mountain View for supplies, always arriving at dawn and departing before noon, regardless of weather or road conditions. The most substantial information about Ambrose comes from his wife's family. He married Eliza Crawford in 1912, a woman 20 years his junior from a neighboring county. Eliza's sister, Margaret, provided Morrison with several letters she had received in the early years of the marriage. Initially optimistic in tone, The letters grew increasingly strange, with references to the others who share our roof, though they have no breath, and Ambrose's experiments with the boundaries. The final letter, dated March 1915, reads in part, "I must be brief, as they do not know I am writing. Something grows within me, but Ambrose says it is not natural at all, but a vessel. They have prepared a special room with walls of silver mirrors so that they can observe from all angles. I fear what will happen when my time comes. If you do not hear from me by summer's end, please contact the authorities, though I doubt they would believe what occurs here." Margaret did attempt to contact authorities, as documented in a letter she wrote to the Stone County Sheriff, dated July 1915. The response, signed by then-Sheriff William Dawkins, dismisses her concerns. "Mrs. Crawford, I have personally visited the Harlow residence and found your sister in good health. She assured me that she is well treated and that her previous letter was the result of emotional distress. Mr. Harlow was cordial and the household appears orderly. Your sister asked me to convey that she will write to you after her confinement. No such letter ever arrived. No record exists of Eliza's death. She simply disappears from all official documentation after 1915. Ambrose continued to make his semi-annual trips to town, always alone, becoming increasingly unkempt and erratic in his interactions with merchants. By the 1920s, he was accompanied by a young man he introduced as his son, Thaddeus, though no one recalled Eliza ever appearing in public visibly pregnant. Parker recalled that Thaddeus had an unusual manner of speaking, words all right, but rhythm all wrong, like he learned talking from a book instead of people. More significantly, Parker noticed that Thaddeus's eyes would sometimes change color during conversation, shifting from brown to amber when certain subjects arose. Most troubling was Parker's observation that Thaddeus cast no reflection in the store's security mirror, an anomaly Parker attributed at the time to a trick of the light, but which left a lasting impression. Morrison's investigation uncovered a disturbing detail about Thaddeus through an interview with Edwin Parker, who had operated the general store in Mountain View during the 1920s. In 1924, Thaddeus appeared in town with a woman he introduced as his wife, Coraline. No record of their marriage exists in any county office in Arkansas. According to Parker's account, Coraline never spoke during their visits to the store. She would stand motionless while Thaddeus selected supplies, only moving when directed. Parker noted that her eyes, like those of Thaddeus and Ambrose, had that strange amber look about them in certain lights. Morrison's investigation took a personal toll. In her private journal, she described increasingly unsettling experiences as her research deepened. Strange phone calls where no one spoke, but a rhythmic breathing could be heard. Packages arriving containing mirrors that shattered within hours. The sensation of being watched through windows at night. Her colleagues at the Observer noted her deteriorating physical condition, weight loss, pallor, and most notably, a gradual change in her eye color from green to a yellowish amber. Her final article, published on November 3, 1963, described her intention to visit the Harlow property herself. After years of research from a distance, I have decided that first-hand observation is necessary to either confirm or disprove the more disturbing aspects of this case. I have arranged for a photographer and a local guide who knows the terrain to accompany me. We intend to document the current state of the property and, conditions permitting, collect samples for scientific analysis. The article included a photograph of Morrison standing outside the newspaper office with photographer James Allen and guide Walter Pruitt. A detail noted by several readers but dismissed as a printing error was that none of the three cast visible shadows despite the bright sunlight evident in the image. Morrison and her team, photographer James Allen and guide Walter Pruitt, departed on November 5th. They were reported missing on November 8th when they failed to return. A search party followed their intended route, but found no trace of the three beyond a final campsite approximately 1 mile from the Harlow property line. Their vehicle remained parked at the end of the logging road. Their equipment, including Morrison's notebook and Allen's cameras, was never recovered. The search was abandoned after 4 days due to what the official report described as adverse environmental conditions, specifically an unusual dense fog that descended over the area and refused to disperse despite clear weather in surrounding regions. Search team members reported disorientation, equipment failures, and disturbing auditory phenomena described as whispers that seemed to originate from within their own bodies. Most significantly, several members of the search team reported briefly glimpsing 3 figures watching them from the edge of the forest, figures that matched the general appearance of Morrison, Allen, and Pruitt, but which moved in perfect synchronization and appeared to have eyes that reflected light like those of nocturnal animals. These sightings were officially attributed to stress, fatigue, and the psychological impact of searching for missing colleagues. The case took an unexpected turn in 1967 when Dr. Lewis Fuller, a geologist conducting a survey for the U.S. Geological Survey, discovered a series of unusual formations in the limestone caves that riddle the area beneath the Harlow property. Fuller's report, later classified by the federal government but partially leaked in 1982, described chambers that appeared to have been artificially enlarged and modified with surfaces polished to a mirror finish. Fuller noted that the cave system did not conform to normal geological principles. Passages that should have connected based on survey measurements instead led to entirely different sections of the system. Chambers that should have been physically impossible based on the surrounding rock structure nevertheless existed. Most peculiarly, certain sections appeared larger on the inside than external measurements would allow, a phenomenon Fuller attributed to unusual acoustic properties creating sensory illusions. Most significant was Fuller's discovery of what he termed a migration passage, a narrow tunnel that descended at a sharp angle for more than 800 feet before opening into a larger chamber. This chamber contained clear evidence of human habitation, stone benches arranged in a circle, niches carved into the walls containing preserved animal specimens, and most disturbingly, a collection of human clothing dating from different eras, neatly folded and arranged by size. Fuller's report noted that the air in this chamber was unusually cold and possessed a distinct metallic quality that caused respiratory distress after approximately 20 minutes of exposure. His instruments registered abnormal magnetic fluctuations that interfered with compass readings and eventually caused his battery-powered lights to fail. As he described it, the impression is unavoidable that whatever or whoever entered the space did not leave by the same route, or perhaps did not leave at all in the conventional sense. The central feature of the chamber, not mentioned in the official report, but described in Fuller's personal journal, was a circular pool of what appeared to be water, but which exhibited unusual properties. It reflected no light, created no ripples when disturbed, and maintained a constant temperature, several degrees below freezing without solidifying. Most significant was Fuller's observation that the stone floor of the chamber bore hundreds of footprints preserved in a thin layer of limestone deposits, footprints that entered the chamber from the tunnel, but showed no corresponding exits. Fuller described it as a hole in the world rather than a conventional liquid. Fuller emerged from the cave system after 3 days underground, reportedly disoriented and suffering from symptoms similar to radiation exposure, though subsequent testing showed no evidence of radioactive materials. He took a leave of absence from the USGS shortly after filing his report, and later resigned his position. He died in 1972 of an aggressive form of cancer that his doctor described as having unusual properties inconsistent with known carcinoma variants. Before his death, Fuller gave a single interview to a graduate student named Howard Keller, who was researching Ozark cave systems. The interview, recorded on cassette tape and now housed in the University of Arkansas archives, includes Fuller's final thoughts on the Harlow case. Whatever was happening in that house was just the surface. The real activity was below. I believe the Harlows found something in those caves, something that changed them. Or perhaps they always knew it was there. Maybe that's why they chose that specific property in the first place. Either way, I'm convinced they're still down there. Not living, not dead, but existing in some state I lack the vocabulary to describe. The cassette continues with nearly 20 minutes of silence, after which Fuller's voice returns, noticeably altered in tone and cadence. They found a way to slip between. That's what the circular arrangements were for: the beds, the benches, the silhouettes, anchors for crossing. They were what came through from the other side, wearing the shapes they thought would cause the least alarm. But they got it wrong, as they always do. They don't move naturally, they don't speak with natural voices, and they cast no shadows, even in the brightest light. Keller reported that at this point in the interview, Fuller's eyes had taken on an amber hue that had not been present earlier. The interview ended abruptly when Fuller complained of a sudden severe headache. He was hospitalized the following day with a cancer diagnosis that would eventually claim his life. The next significant development came in 1968, when a hunting party, consisting of 4 men from Little Rock, became disoriented during a storm and inadvertently trespassed on the former Harlow property. The sole survivor, Martin Graves, was found 3 days later, wandering along Highway 9, suffering from exposure and what doctors diagnosed as acute psychological trauma. The group approached, seeking shelter from the storm, and was greeted at the door by the tall, thin man who called himself Ambrose Harlow. According to Graves, the interior of the house was wrong in ways I can't quite explain. Angles that should have been right weren't. Distances that seemed short from outside stretched on once inside. The group was introduced to other family members, an elderly man called Ezekiel, a middle-aged couple identified as Thaddeus, and Coraline, and several other individuals who never spoke but moved around the room in perfect coordination, like dancers following choreography no one else could hear. Graves noted that all members of the household had amber eyes that seemed to reflect light, even in dark corners of the room. Graves' account, recorded during his subsequent psychiatric treatment, describes finding the original Harlow house not abandoned, but meticulously maintained. Smoke rose from the chimney, lights glowed in the windows. More disturbing was his observation that none of them appeared to cast shadows, despite the multiple light sources throughout the house. When he mentioned this anomaly to his companions, they seemed unable to comprehend his concern, responding with blank stares. The hunting party was offered food and drink, which all but Graves consumed. He described watching his friends become increasingly lethargic and confused as the evening progressed. The family engaged them in conversation about their lives, asking peculiarly specific questions about family relationships, daily routines, and physical sensations. Graves recalled Ambrose asking his friend Daniel, "When you feel joy, where in your body does it first register?" For humans, I mean. As the night progressed, Graves observed that his friends began to mimic the movements and speech patterns of their hosts. By midnight, the 3 hunters were moving in unison with each other, their expressions vacant, their eyes beginning to take on the amber hue characteristic of the Harlow family. Graves claimed he feigned sleep, but observed through partially closed eyes as his friends were led, one by one, to the basement. When only he remained, he fled the house and ran blindly through the forest until collapsing from exhaustion. Upon waking at dawn, he attempted to return to the area with the intention of helping his friends, but found himself unable to locate the house despite hours of searching. The forest seemed to have shifted around me, landmarks changing position each time I turned around. Most disturbing was Graves's claim that during his flight through the forest, he glimpsed his 3 friends standing among the trees, watching him with amber eyes, their movements perfectly synchronized, their feet hovering slightly above the ground. He reported that they called to him not individually, but in unison. Their voices blended into a single tone that seemed to emanate not from their mouths, but from the air around them. Official records show that a search was conducted for the missing hunters, Daniel Weber, Richard Conley, and Thomas Frost, but no trace was ever found. Graves himself was dismissed as delusional, his story attributed to hallucinations brought on by consuming wild mushrooms in conjunction with the alcohol the group had brought along on their trip. He was briefly institutionalized before being released into his family's care. He died in 1970 in what was ruled a hunting accident, though the circumstances, found hanging from a tree with precise surgical incisions along his spine, raised questions that were never adequately addressed. The autopsy report, sealed until 1985, noted several anomalies beyond the unusual incisions. Graves's eyes had changed from brown to amber. His internal organs showed signs of rearrangement that could not be attributed to the hanging. And most significantly, the medical examiner found evidence that certain bodily tissues had been systematically replaced with an unidentified fibrous material that resembles human tissue in structure, but contains cellular properties inconsistent with known biological principles. The most concrete evidence regarding the Harlow case emerged in 1969, when construction crews breaking ground for a new dam project approximately 12 miles from the original property unearthed a metal container sealed with an unknown alloy. Inside was a journal identified as belonging to Thaddeus Harlow, containing entries from 1933 to 1936. The journal, now held in a climate-controlled vault at the University of Arkansas, provides disturbing insights into the family's activities. Written in a precise, almost mechanical hand, it documents what Thaddeus referred to as the Great Work, apparently a multi-generational project initiated by Ezekiel and continued by his descendants. The early entries describe experiments involving mirrors, acoustics, and what Thaddeus terms the architecture of absence, creating spaces specifically designed to be overlooked by the human mind. He writes, "Father's modifications to the house have achieved 93% invisibility to casual observation. Visitors see only what structural logic tells them should be there, not what actually exists." The adjacent chamber, for instance, registers to the outside eye as a solid wall, despite occupying nearly 300 cubic feet of space. Thaddeus documents the family's discovery of the thin places in the cave system beneath their property, locations where, under certain conditions of light, sound, and geometrical alignment, the boundaries between different states of existence became permeable. He writes, "The transition is not between here and elsewhere, as Father initially theorized, but between being and non-being, a state where the rules that govern physical form become malleable." The journal details extensive experiments with these thin places, initially using animals. Thaddeus describes bringing dogs, cats, and eventually larger mammals like deer into the circular chamber deep within the cave system. The animals would be arranged in specific formations around the central pool, and mirrors would be positioned to create endless reflections. Thaddeus notes that after a certain duration of exposure to these conditions, the animals would achieve transition, a process he describes as neither death nor transformation, but a slipping between states of being. The nature of these transitions becomes clearer in subsequent entries. Thaddeus writes of vessels successfully animated and describes a binding technique that has improved significantly. He writes of echo duration extended to 73 minutes before collapse, a new record. He mentions that with a specific number, now operational, we can proceed to the next phase. Father believes a complete circuit will allow for permanent transfer rather than the temporary visitations we've achieved thus far. Later entries suggest that the vessels were not crafted objects, but human subjects, individuals who had been led to the property and subjected to the same transitional process as the animals. Thaddeus refers to them by number rather than name and describes their gradual transformation, loss of independent movement, acquisition of amber eye coloration, and eventually the ability to serve as anchors or doorways for those who wish to enter. The identities of those who wish to enter are never explicitly stated, but Thaddeus's descriptions suggest entities that exist in a state fundamentally different from human consciousness, beings that perceive reality through principles alien to human understanding and that require extensive adaptation to interact with the physical world. Particularly disturbing is Thaddeus's documentation of the entity's attempts to understand human experience. He describes sessions in which the vessels are used to explore specific emotions or sensations, with the entities experiencing them vicariously and often incompletely. They remain confused by the concept of individuality, he writes. The notion that each human experiences reality separately rather than as a unified consciousness is to them both fascinating and disturbing. The journal entries grow increasingly cryptic in the final months, with references to the thinning between worlds and voices from beneath that guide our hands. The final entry, dated October 16, 1936, the day before Sheriff Cooper's visit, reads, "They are coming through more clearly now, no longer requiring the vessels for manifestation. Coraline reports sounds emanating from her skin when she stands in the northern corner of the kitchen. Father has not spoken in 3 days, but communicates through written messages that do not appear to be in his handwriting. The time approaches for abandonment of these forms. We go below tonight to prepare the way for those who have always been here." This last entry is followed by a series of symbols similar to those carved into the oak tree in the clearing Prentice discovered and into the stone door in the cellar that Sheriff Cooper described. Cryptographers and linguists who have examined these symbols have been unable to attribute them to any known language or symbolic system, though certain elements bear a superficial resemblance to Sumerian cuneiform and early Chinese pictographs. In the decades since, the Harlow property has remained officially unoccupied. The land was eventually absorbed into the Ozark National Forest, with access restricted under various administrative designations. Satellite imagery from the 1980s shows the house still standing, though partially obscured by vegetation. By the 1990s, no structure is visible from above, suggesting either complete deterioration or deliberate demolition. However, local accounts persist of unusual phenomena in the area. Hikers report disorientation and lost time when venturing near the property boundaries. Electronic devices malfunction. GPS coordinates shift unpredictably. Most commonly reported is the sensation of being watched by multiple observers simultaneously from all directions. Park rangers assigned to the area tend to request transfers within months of beginning their posts. Those who have served longer terms report experiencing recurring dreams featuring identical figures standing in a circle, watching them with amber eyes that reflect light even in complete darkness. Several rangers have noted finding their own footprints in areas they have no memory of visiting, always in circular patterns around solitary trees or unusual rock formations. Perhaps most disturbing are the sporadic reports of encounters with individuals identified by locals as the Harlow adults, always moving in perfect unison and always observed at the periphery of vision in the moment, just before twilight fades to full darkness. These sightings aren't limited to the immediate vicinity of the original property, but occur throughout the Ozark region, always in remote areas, always to isolated individuals. Descriptions of these encounters follow a consistent pattern. The observer notices an unusual silence, a cessation of insect sounds, bird calls, and even the ambient noise of wind through leaves. This is followed by the sensation of being watched from multiple directions simultaneously. When the observer turns to locate the source of this sensation, they briefly glimpse figures standing motionless among the trees, watching with amber eyes that reflect light like those of nocturnal animals. Those who report such encounters often describe subsequent experiences suggestive of ongoing observation or even pursuit, finding circular arrangements of stones or sticks outside their tents while camping, hearing whispered voices that seem to emanate from within their own bodies, and most frequently noticing that their own shadows sometimes move independently of their bodies, especially at dawn and dusk. The three-person team reported finding a chamber deep within the system that contained evidence of recent human habitation, including modern camping equipment and clothing. Most significantly, they described finding pairs of identical hiking boots arranged in a perfect circle, all facing inward, still containing foot impressions in the insoles that were warm to the touch. The team collected photographs and samples, but reported that their equipment was stolen while they slept at their campsite that night. The most recent documented incident occurred in 1968, when a spelunking expedition discovered a previously unmapped cave system near the Buffalo National River. One member of the team, Lisa Chen, later reported waking briefly during the night and observing identical figures standing in a circle around our tents, swaying slightly as though moved by a wind that wasn't there. The other team members reported similar dreams. Chen's subsequent account, documented during sessions with a psychologist specializing in trauma, included details not shared publicly. Their eyes caught the moonlight and reflected it back amber. They moved in perfect synchronization, as though controlled by a single mind. Most disturbing was their attempt to speak. Their mouths moved in unison, but the sound seemed to come from the air around us rather than from them directly. They asked questions about how it feels to dream, about where in the body fear originates, about what it means to be separate from others. I pretended to be asleep, but somehow they knew I was conscious. One of them, or perhaps all of them speaking together, said, "We see you through your skin." Following this experience, Chen reported recurring episodes in which her reflection in mirrors or other reflective surfaces would move independently of her actual movements, sometimes displaying amber eyes that would revert to her normal brown when she looked at them directly. She relocated from Arkansas to California shortly after these experiences began, but reported that the phenomena followed her. She was found deceased in her apartment in San Francisco in 1972, with the coroner's report noting unusual discoloration of the ocular tissues and evidence of surgical precision in certain unexplained internal injuries. The case of the Harlow family remains officially unsolved. The disappearances associated with the property and its vicinity have never been adequately explained. The journal attributed to Thaddeus Harlow raises more questions than it answers, particularly regarding the identity and nature of those who have always been here and the purpose of the vessels the family apparently created. What can be said with certainty is that something unusual occurred in that remote corner of the Ozarks, something that left its mark not just in official records, but in the collective memory of the region. To this day, locals avoid certain areas of the forest. They teach others to return home before dark, and they pay particular attention to the behavior of wildlife, knowing that when the birds fall silent, it's time to be elsewhere. As for the Harlow family themselves, no bodies were ever found, no definitive evidence of foul play ever established. In the most technical sense, they remain missing persons, their case still open in the dusty archives of the Stone County Sheriff's Department. But as Dr. Fuller suggested in his final interview, perhaps they never left at all. Perhaps they simply found a way to slip between, to exist in some state beyond our conventional understanding of presence and absence. The forest has reclaimed the land where their house once stood. Hikers who venture near the site report an unusual density of undergrowth that makes passage difficult, as though the forest itself is deliberately obscuring something it doesn't want found. The limestone caves beneath the property remain largely unexplored, their depths concealing whatever secrets the Harlows may have discovered, or whatever may have discovered the Harlows. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is its pattern of affecting those who investigate too deeply. From Claudia Morrison to Dr. Fuller to Martin Graves, those who have sought answers have often met with misfortune. This narrative itself represents a risk, a reopening of questions long buried under decades of official neglect and collective forgetting. As night falls over the Ozarks, the hollows and ridges cast complex shadows. In certain remote areas, hikers report that these shadows sometimes move independently of their sources, flowing uphill or bending around corners that should block their path. And in the moment when twilight balances perfectly between day and night, some claim to hear whispers emanating not from any visible source, but from within their own skin, voices speaking in unison, with words all right but rhythm all wrong, asking specific questions about joy and where in the body it first registers. The Harlow case reminds us that some mysteries resist conventional explanation. Some doors, once opened, cannot be properly closed. And some stories, once told, continue to echo long after the teller has fallen silent. In the deepest hollows of the Ozarks, where sunlight touches the ground for only a few hours each day, those echoes seem to gather strength rather than fade with passing time. For those who might consider visiting the area where these events took place, local authorities offer standard warnings about wilderness hazards, rough terrain, wild animals, unpredictable weather. They do not mention the Harlow family or the persistent rumors of strange figures moving in perfect unison through the trees at dusk. They do not explain why certain areas remain undeveloped despite their natural beauty and potential for tourism. Some stories are best left untold, some places best left unvisited. The Harlow case suggests that there are corners of our world where the conventional boundaries between presence and absence, between past and present, between what was and what is, have become compromised. Whether through human action or some quality inherent to the location itself, a thinning has occurred, a permeable space where something else can slip through. And perhaps most disturbing of all is the possibility that what came through no longer requires the specific conditions the Harlows created, that it has adapted, learned, evolved, that it moves among us now, wearing shapes designed to cause the least alarm, though not quite getting the details right. They don't move naturally, they don't speak with natural voices, and they cast no shadows, even in the brightest light. The most recent development in the Harlow case came in the form of a series of photographs discovered in 2009 in the personal effects of James Allen, the photographer who disappeared with Claudia Morrison in 1963. The photographs, found in a weatherproof container buried beneath the floorboards of Allen's former residence during renovation, show what appears to be the interior of the Harlow house as it existed at the time of their visit. The images reveal rooms arranged in configurations that defy architectural logic, doorways that open onto the same room from different angles, windows that look out onto landscapes not consistent with the property's known location, and, most significantly, mirrors positioned to create infinite reflections that, upon close examination, contain subtle variations. In several of these reflections, amber eyes can be discerned watching from otherwise empty corridors. The final photograph in the sequence shows several identical figures standing in a circle in what appears to be the transition room, described in historical accounts. Their features are indistinct due to motion blur, but their eyes are clearly visible, amber points of light that appear to hover in the darkness rather than being attached to physical forms. On the back of this photograph, written in handwriting identified as Allen's, is a single line. They say they've always been here, watching through the thin places. They say they're ready to show us what's on the other side. Those who have viewed these photographs report a strange after effect, the persistent sensation of being observed from multiple angles simultaneously, particularly in rooms containing mirrors or reflective surfaces. Several individuals who studied the images extensively have reported subsequent dreams featuring identical figures standing around their beds, watching with amber eyes, asking questions about what it means to be separate, to be singular, to be alone in one's skin. The Ozarks hold many secrets. Most are benign, hidden valleys of rare wildflowers, ancient trees that predate European settlement, caves adorned with the artwork of indigenous peoples long departed. But some secrets are of a different nature. Some are kept not because they are precious, but because they are dangerous, not physically perhaps, but in the way they undermine our understanding of what is and is not possible. The Harlow case suggests that reality may be more porous than we typically assume, that the boundaries we take for granted between here and elsewhere, between now and then, between self and other, may under certain conditions become permeable. It suggests that something watches from the other side of those boundaries, something that occasionally finds ways to slip through. If you find yourself in the Ozarks, particularly in the remote areas of Stone County, pay attention to the behavior of wildlife. Notice when the birds fall silent. Be wary of perfect circles occurring in nature, of reflective surfaces that don't quite behave as they should, of the sensation of being observed when you're supposedly alone. And if you happen to encounter figures moving in perfect unison at the edge of your vision, don't look directly at them. Don't answer if they speak. And whatever you do, don't follow when they invite you to see what's on the other side. For the Harlows discovered something in those hills, something that changed them fundamentally. And if the persistent rumors and sightings are to be believed, they're still there, neither living nor dead, but existing in some state between. Still watching, still learning, still trying to understand what it means to be human, one vessel at a time. As the sun sets over the Ozarks tonight, pay attention to your shadow. Make sure it moves when you do, that it falls where it should. And if you catch it moving independently, even for a moment, or if you notice your reflection watching you with amber eyes, know that you've drawn their attention. Know that the boundary between you and them has grown thin. And know that the Harlows are still looking for new vessels, still preparing the way for those who have always been here.